So without further ado, I would like to welcome Tiana, Angela, and Rich from all sorts of different important agencies in Hawaii who are going to come and tell us about the Manu'oko. So take it away. Thanks.
Cool. All right, good morning, everybody. Yeah, so I'm Tiana, and we'll be talking about the guidelines and best practices that we have for Manu'oko, or the white terns. Before we get started, we just want to say thanks to Ka'ulunani Urban Community Forestry Program. They helped fund this project and published it and allowed us to get these guidelines out for tree workers and anybody else working out in the landscaping community. And our project partners, Aloha Arborist Association, the Hui Manu'oko, Fish and Wildlife, Forestry and Wildlife, Pacific Rim, the city, Hawaiian Electric, and Lake Gibby. He's an arborist that volunteers and helps us put chicks and birds back up in the trees. So these guidelines and best practices, they were created to help tree workers and train staff to make recommendations and how to basically how to work around Manu'oko and what kind of practices they can do while working. It helps them avoid any disturbance or risk towards the birds, and it increases their stewardship for the trees. Like, it helps them when they do tree trimmings, it helps them make nests better and stuff, and it improves public awareness, and then it helps us build good relations with the tree trimming companies and government agencies and the community. So what's in it for you is that these guidelines help tree trimmers actually finish their job. So before, we actually, if there was a nesting tern or breeding terns in the trees, we would come in and we would just say, you can't cut that tree down. So no work would be allowed at all. And so we created these practices so that tree trimmers and landscaping companies are allowed to do work with terns in them. And in Hawaii, on Oahu, there's terns everywhere in a lot of urban areas. And so it's really difficult to tell them that they can't cut a tree down. Yeah, that's the main thing that we wanted these guidelines and best practices, is to create these relationships with the tree companies so that they are allowed to continue to do their work. So, like I said before, it's mostly, these guidelines are for tree companies, landscaping agencies, public agencies, the community groups, and anybody in the community that wants to learn about terns and know if they see something happening, like what they should do and stuff.
Yeah, hey, my name is Rich Downs. I'm with the Hui Manu'oko, and I'll be walking you through the next slides in our set here. The Hui Manu'oko is it's a group of people who represent various agencies and organizations across Oahu who have an interest in the terns. In addition to agencies and organizations, also a lot of just your private citizens like myself, people who are interested in the terns. The Hui Manu'oko provides a place for us all to come together, to share information, and to collaborate in the interest of the terns. One of the things that we've been doing is studying the breeding behavior of the terns for the past 5 years now. And the new best management practices that we're talking with you about today are the result of the study that we've done. Our goal was to better understand the breeding behavior of the terns, and as a result of what we learned about them, our better understanding of their breeding behavior, we were able to come up with some guidelines for managing, maintaining the trees on Oahu that are more in tune with what we now understand about the terns. And part of that was to dispel a number of false notions we had about the terns. And the first one was that human activity in close proximity to the mono oku, or white tern, is actually the ornithological name for this bird. Somehow there was a thought that human activity close to the birds was somehow dangerous for them. We've discovered that's simply not to be the case. Whenever working or being around a wild animal, you need to be somewhat careful, but you don't need to be overly cautious when it comes to the mono oku. Another false impression was that tree companies needed to stay away from a tree if there's a white tern in it until they're completely finished with the breeding. We just discovered that not to be the case. They can actually tolerate a fair amount of activity. So that opens up more possibilities for the trimmers, the arborists, to work in the trees. Also, a false notion was that if a white tern flies near you or around you, which they all want to do, that arborists would need to just get out of the tree and back away. These birds are naturally curious, and they will come check you out. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that you're causing them any particular distress or threatening them in any way. And another really, really important bit of bad information it is very commonly encountered, is that if you touch a white chick that you find on the ground, that the parents will somehow smell your scent and will ultimately reject the chick. That's simply not the case. So we encourage tree trimmers, workers around the trees, if you come across a fallen chick, please don't just leave it there. You can actually pick it up and put it back. So that's some of the old notions we had. And then in with the new information. So it's one thing to make these, draw these new conclusions based on new and more complete information. It's another thing to be able to get that information out to the arborist community so that they can have the benefit of that information and change their work habits based on new and more complete information. So we work with a variety of the arborist companies around town, and to get that word out. So we provide tools to help them know where the trees are that the terns are nesting in. We train them in the techniques for surveying, checking out a tree to identify if there's breeding activity going on in the tree. And we've come up with some best practices to help them to know how to do the work that they need to do when there's active breeding activity going on in the trees. And despite all of our best efforts and best intentions, occasionally an emergency does crop up. Something happens. A chick gets knocked out of the tree. So while work is being done, what to do then? We provide guidance on how to respond to that. And key to all this is an improved understanding of the breeding biology of the white terns, the mono oku, and their breeding habits. A couple of really, really important things to bear in mind about these birds is, first of all, they are seabirds. They're common throughout the tropics, mostly in the Pacific, although also found in the Atlantic. And what's particularly important for us to keep in mind for the white terns in Hawaii is the only place in the major Hawaiian islands where they breed is, strangely enough, on Oahu, and even more strangely, only in the greater Honolulu, Waikiki area. So that's important for arborists to understand when trimming trees on Oahu. If you're going to be trimming trees in the Honolulu, Waikiki area, you have to be especially on the lookout for the white terns. Also, a better understanding of their lifespan, how long they live, their feeding behavior, what the breeding season looks like, when are you more likely to see them breeding in the trees, and then a better understanding of how do they nest in the trees. and then their attachment to particular breeding sites. First, need to make sure we're talking about this. We're talking about the right bird. In the right upper right-hand corner here is a picture of a mono oku, or white tern, in flight. As you can see, the plumage is completely white, and I mean completely white. No other color of feathers at any time of the year. They are all white, completely white, both males and females, no difference between the sexes. You know, that pointed black beak and dark eyes, and a good size. They're medium size for terns, about a 30-inch wingspan. So the white terns are actually just one of 30 plus different species of terns that you'll find in the world of birds. This one, as I say, is a tropic seabird, and fairly commonly seen in the Honolulu, Waikiki area of Oahu. Yeah, not to be confused with white pigeons or the egrets, which we also find in the same area on Oahu. As I mentioned, the distribution of the breeding range on Oahu it's focused in the greater Honolulu, Waikiki area, as the map here shows. Yeah, this is Honolulu, Waikiki here along the coast. Each one of these pins represents a tree where we've documented breeding occurring since 2016. And the color of the pin just indicates when we added a tree to the breeding map. And as you can see, the breeding range hasn't expanded all that much over the past 5 years. They're still pretty much in the same general areas where we've been seeing them breeding. Although we do see them breeding out an increasing number of trees. Every year since we started doing the surveys, we've been adding a couple hundred new trees to the map. So more and more trees in the greater Honolulu, Waikiki area are being used by the terns for breeding purposes, which makes it all the more important for tree care professionals to know about these birds, because they're going to encounter them when maintaining the trees on Oahu. As I mentioned, they're very tolerant of human activity. This is just a short little video clip that shows a white tern. Here's one actually right here in this tree. It's sitting on this very small chick. And this is a very low branch in the tree. It's about 7 feet off the ground. And the street where this tree is located, it's in the heart of Waikiki on the busiest street in Waikiki. Pretty much all day and most of the night, there's a steady stream of cars on the street on one side of that tree, and a steady stream of pedestrians on the sidewalk on the other side. As you can see, that adult is sitting there attending its chick, completely unperturbed by all the human activity going on around it. How long they live? If you look in a bird book, it will tell you that they typically live 16 to 18 years. However, we have documented this one in this picture. We know it to have been 35 years old when we found it sitting on an egg downtown Honolulu. That's what an egg looks like right there. You can see that the little metal band on its leg. Over time, we were able to recover the numbers off the band and send that number into the bird banding lab that maintains data on all banded birds, and they were able to tell us exactly where that bird had been banded, how long ago it was, and yeah, it was 35 years old when we found it and still breeding. So they can live to be ripe old age and continue breeding. What does the breeding season look like? Another really, really important piece of information for tree care professionals. Earlier we thought that, and again, if you look at a bird book, it'll tell you that white terns are sort of notorious for not being very rigid about their breeding behaviors. However, we believe, based on a lot of anecdotal information, that the breeding season was pretty much concentrated in the winter and early spring, and then in the summer, virtually no breeding activity would be seen. So tree trimmers thought that if you trimmed trees in the summertime, they just wouldn't have to really be too concerned about the terns. As it turns out, based on our observations for the period 2016 to 2019, actually they breed year round, but with a definite peak in the breeding season, January, February, the busiest times of the year, and then it tails off through the summer months, and then the breeding season sort of resumes in September. And in case you're wondering what the two different colors of the bar chart mean, the sort of turquoise, that's the total number of eggs that we discovered in trees across to the breeding range per month. And the sort of lime green is those are the eggs for which that were the first of the season, first of the breeding season, laid by a particular pair. Interesting point of information for those of us who are trying to better understand the breeding biology. Simple point being though here that if you're a tree care professional working in Honolulu, Waikiki, you need to be on the lookout for white terns year round. As I mentioned before, another very important thing about the white terns is to realize that when you go looking for them in trees, you ought not to be looking for a nest or a traditional nest because they don't build nests. In fact, they are the only seabird that lays eggs in trees without even pretending to build a nest. So that can make it harder to find them, spot them when they are breeding in the trees. Instead, what they do is they look for a structure in the tree that will help them to hold the egg in place. And these are examples of the types of nesting spots that we find them using. Pay particular attention to this one right here. We call it a cup type nesting spot. And that's important because there's certain species of trees that they prefer to nest in. And those are trees that when trimmed, scar tissue forms around that cup, makes a nice little cup. And then as you can see here, they just lay their egg in that cup and then sit on it to incubate it. This one here is also sitting on an egg in a cup, completely covered. And this one here is also tending an egg in a cup. So that's probably the most commonly seen nest type that we encounter. And those nesting spots are formed because either a branch got broken off or a branch was trimmed away during maintenance of the tree. And we've documented them breeding in nearly 60 species of trees across the breeding range, but there are certain ones, as I mentioned, that they have a definite preference for. And these trees are the ones that, when trimmed, scar tissue forms, makes a nice little cup for them, and they use those quite successfully in lieu of building a nest. So when I first started working with the terns back in 2016, the fact that they didn't build a nest in a tree seemed like not a very good idea. If you're a bird and you're breeding on an island like Oahu, and the peak of your breeding season also coincides with the windiest time of the year, it always seemed to me like a really bad idea to not build a nest. And I figured probably over time they would learn that it was if they were going to really survive on that island, they would need to learn how to build nests. That was until one day when I was surveying, I came across one that was in a tree, sitting on an egg during a windstorm. And this wasn't the most powerful gust that came along while I was there, but it was one that I managed to do a video with my iPhone. And as you can see, it's holding on. It is sitting on an egg. It survived this storm and those that followed, and eventually that egg hatched, and eventually the chick fled. This made a believer out of me that actually building a nest for them would be a bad idea, because if that bird were sitting on an egg in a nest, very good chance that the nest would have got blown out of the tree during this one of those gusts, and the egg would have been lost, the nest would have been lost. But since there is no nest between the adult and the egg, the adult was able to sink its claws into the bark of the tree and hold on tight. And we have seen them riding out some very, very strong and very prolonged windstorms to successfully hatch an egg and raise their chicks, which would not have been possible if there had been a nest between them and the egg. So it's actually it is a good idea. It's an adaptation for breeding on windy islands in the Pacific. Also, it's also important for tree trimmers to understand when they come across a tern sitting on an egg. First of all, what does it look like? Well, here's a picture of a white tern adult sitting on an egg, what we call the nesting position. It's once they lay an egg, it's 35 days plus or minus, but pretty darn close to 35 days before it hatches. During that time, about 99.9% of the time, one or the other of the adults will be sitting on the egg. So we tell trimmers, if you see a white tern sitting in the same spot in the tree for day after day, chances are it's sitting on an egg. And then it's also important to understand that the adults are very, very devoted to the egg and to their chick, and they will expend great care and taking care of it and feeding it from the time it hatches to the time it fledges, which is about 45 days. Much of that time, the chick will be sitting there on the branch alone. So it's important for a tree trimmer to understand when they are surveying, checking a tree out for breeding activity, to be aware that there may be a small chick just sitting there all alone because the adults are out catching fish to bring back to feed it. So chicks spend a lot of the time alone in the tree. And as I mentioned, it's about 45 days from the time the egg hatches to when the chick is able to fly. And then even after they're able to fly, there are many things that they're dependent on their parents for, chief of which is to be fed, while they themselves are learning how to fish. And they are seabirds, so they eat fish and only fish, and they catch fish by flying out to sea and scooping fish out of the water with their long black beaks. It's pretty tricky. It takes a while for a chick to learn how to do that, so the parents would be busy feeding them for a couple of months after the chick is even able to fly. So in that entire period, they will continue to come back to the tree with the chick hatch. So trimmers need to be aware. Once they see an egg, it's going to be 3 to 4 months before that chick will be fledged and out of the tree. It's also important for people who work in and around the terns to be able to see and understand what they look like as they grow and develop. So up in the upper left-hand corner here, we have a very young chick. This one's about a week old, and as I mentioned, by the time they become adults, they're completely white. But when they hatch, they can be a range of colors from fairly light to sort of yellow blonde, tan, brown, dark brown. But as they mature and their adult plumage comes in, they become white. The mono oku, one of the reasons that we pay particular attention to them is they have very significant historical and cultural importance in the Hawaiian Islands. The Hawaiian name itself is a mono oku, which is simply the Hawaiian way of saying bird of ku. Ku is a principal Hawaiian deity, and it is the only bird of all the native Hawaiian birds. It is the only bird that was named after a Hawaiian god. So for some reason, the ancient Hawaiians saw this bird as being having some sort of special significant significance that they named it after one of the principal gods. And it appears in Hawaiian legends. one of the reasons why it's so important to the Polynesians is because of its role in wayfinding. If you know anything about the Polynesians, you know that they are famous for their ability to navigate, sailing great distances over the wide open oceans. And to do that, to find their way, they depend on a number of natural phenomena. Celestial navigation, for example, will they use the stars to guide them to a grouping of islands. But when they get near the in the area of the islands, they still have to find land, and they use the white terns to help them find land because well, they're seabirds, as we mentioned. They lay their eggs and raise their chicks on land, but they have to go out to the ocean to catch fish. So the navigators of old as well as today know that if they see a white tern flying around with a fish in its mouth, that they can follow it and it will take them to land. Terns, when they catch a fish, they make a beeline straight back to the island, straight back to the tree where their chick is waiting for them. So if you are paddling out in the ocean and are looking for trying to find land, if you see a white tern with a fish in its mouth, follow it, it will take you to land. I should mention white terns, they're not, of course, the only seabird that catches fish and feeds their chicks on land, but they are one of the very, very few that don't swallow the fish and then regurgitate. They catch the fish, hold it in their beak, and then fly back to feed it to their chicks. The Manooku is the official
Rich,
bird. Yep, yeah, Tiana, I think you were going to take this one.
you should go ahead and take the slide.
Oh, I'm sorry, Angela. Yep.
Yeah, go ahead and take this slide.
Okay. Yeah. So as I said, the Manooku is a very important bird historically and culturally. Back in 2007, it was actually named the official bird of the city of Honolulu, in recognition of its cultural and historical significance, and the fact that of the major Hawaiian islands, Honolulu is the only place where you will find them breeding. So it has a special significance. It's protected by state and federal law, and perhaps even most important, it is loved and adored by many. It's not at all unusual to see people on the streets of Honolulu who know about the bird, simply be standing and watching them as they breed, as they tend their chicks and live out their lives on the branches of trees. They're just above the sidewalks, as well as soaring beautifully in the skies above. A much loved bird in Honolulu, Waikiki.
All right, so the Manooku under the federal law is protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. I'm not gonna get super in detail with this. I believe Ryan will be talking about this sometime next week, but basically you're under the federal law, you're not allowed to hunt or take egg or the bird. In Hawaii, the law is more stricter. This is because in Hawaii, they consider the Manooku as an indigenous and threatened bird. So for us, for the state of Hawaii, we also considered any disturbances as a take for the bird. The penalties in Hawaii could range from 150 to 15,000, and it could include some jail time.
And so what do we do for best practices for tree services and who are interested in working when there is breeding activity in trees? The the very first step is to get a trained wildlife arborist on board, or trained professional. That's a term I'm borrowing from Ryan. I really like that term. And that might be an arborist, or it might be, could also be a wildlife biologist who's trained and in the best practices for Manuoku breeding sites. And then following that is to determine if the job is near or within the Manuoku breeding areas that Rich outlined earlier. And there are tern breeding maps online. And you can also access those breeding maps on your mobile device. You could do that before going out to the job site with all your vehicles and your crews. That's a good starting point in order to save yourself, a trip out there if there is a lot of breeding activity that could prevent you from conducting your work. Then we're going to also cover the turn tape, which you see the picture of later. Later on, we'll talk about that more, I think. And then you'll want to be surveying for chicks, eggs, and other evidence of breeding. We'll cover that more as well. And then also, if you really take a fancy to this really great native species, you can also support the Manuoku community by providing breeding activity information to Hui Manuoku, but we'll cover all that in more detail as we go. So getting the trained professional on board is, sorry, give me a second here. So the trained professional can be one of the individuals that Aloha Arborist Association has listed on our website. And if you haven't been there yet, the Aloha Arborist Association website has a tab for the Manuoku, and the trained professionals are at the bottom of the list. That's alohaarborist.com. But we also do provide ongoing training. We do provide regular training, and you can also contact us to provide training for your particular firm or tree service. If that's something you're interested in and you have a large number of personnel you'd like to get on board with this. And you can also look for trained professionals on the Aloha Arborist website, alohaarborist.com. We have a Manuoku tab where the professionals who have been trained in the past are listed. Some biologists have already gone through the training and are familiar with the best practices.
Yeah, so we've put together a number of resources that tree workers, as well as our citizen scientists who help us monitor the terns breeding on Oahu. We put together a number of online resources that they can use. They'll work on the mobile device as well as on their desktops. That includes maps that actually show the locations of trees where they're known to be breeding. However, we point out to the arborists as well as our citizen scientists that if a tree isn't on the breeding map, that doesn't mean that there is no breeding activity, because as I showed on previous slides, the terns are adding a couple hundred trees per year on average to the number of trees that they breed in. So it may simply be that this is a new pair and a new tree, and it just hasn't been documented before. So it's important to just be on the lookout for them all the time. We mentioned, Angela mentioned that one of the things that we use is a turn tape. This is the blue ribbons, as you see in these pictures. We are doing this in partnership with the Department of Land and Natural Resources on Oahu. The tape alerts trimmers to the fact that white terns are actively breeding in a particular tree. And on that tape is a number of important pieces of information. First is the message: trim with caution, nesting white terns. And the message used to be do not trim, but as I mentioned, based on what we've observed over time, we now know that it's very possible to trim without disturbing the nesting terns. So now the message is, trim with caution. Another thing that's on the tree, as you see in the one at the bottom of the screen here, is a QR code that will link you to our online resources. And there's also a phone number on the ribbon, which will connect you to the Mano Oku hotline, where you can report, find a chicken on the ground. Call that number and give us that 4-number letter code that's on the tree, and this one PH94, that will tell us exactly where that tree is located, as well as what is known about the breeding activity in that tree. We try to monitor the trees on a monthly basis, especially once we detect breeding activity in it. Now, with over 1,300 trees being used across the breeding range, it's hard to keep up with them all. We have a small army of volunteers who help us, but we're always looking for more. And we especially appreciate the help that tree trimmers provide. We've asked them, if you see breeding activity in a tree that's not on the map, please let us know so we can put that tree on the map. That way we can help, that helps us better understand where they're breeding, but it also helps us help them to know where they're breeding, so we can avoid disturbing breeding terns. Then once the chick is fledged, able to fly, we remove the ribbon so that so trimmers won't needlessly be concerned about breeding activity in a tree once the chick is able to fly. There are a couple exceptions that folks need to be aware of. The fact that there is no ribbon on a tree doesn't necessarily mean there is no breeding activity. It could be, since we last checked, an egg got laid, or it could be that someone has removed the tape. Turns out that these ribbons have become quite popular, and they disappear from some of the streets where have a lot of tourists and a lot of pedestrian traffic. So it might simply mean that the ribbon was removed by someone who was wanting to collect a souvenir. We encourage the trimmers to check our online resources to confirm the species of the trees and where exactly in the tree to look for the nesting spots. We photo document every nesting spot that we find in a tree. So if you go to the database, you will find photos showing the location of that spot in the tree where they are breeding. And they have a tendency, if they successfully breed in a spot in a tree, they have a tendency year after year to come back and use the same spot. So that's another way in which the data that we collect and make available can help trimmers reduce the burden of surveying the trees to find breeding terns, because we can point them exactly to where we've seen them breeding in the past. Another important thing that we point out is terns are not known to breed in palm trees. Although, yeah, there's been a few cases where somebody has taken the ribbon off of a tree where they are nesting and have, I don't know if they're playing a joke on us or what, but they will sometimes put the tape on a palm tree. So if you see a tape on a palm tree, we tell them ignore it. But if you do see a tern nesting in a palm tree, please do let us know, because that would be something that we had not seen or documented before. Another important thing that we do is we help the trimmers understand what it is that they should be looking for breeding activity. Sometimes, you know, like in the case of this small unintended chick in the lower left of this slide, you can see they're quite small, and sometimes their coloration just allows them to blend right in with the tree. But there are other signs of, you know, one, as I mentioned before, there's a position that the adult gets into when it's sitting on an egg. We call that the nesting position or incubating position, where they're hunkered right down, wings in tight, and often you see the actual bump on the egg under their feathers. And they will sit there pretty calm day after day after day. Another clue is once the chick hatches, it sits up there in that same spot. You typically don't wander more than a few inches away from the spot where they hatch, doing nothing but eating and pooping. So over time, you'll see a cluster of white droppings forming on the ground below, as is the case right here. The slide on the upper right, you can see the chick in the tree above in the red circle and the cluster of white droppings on the sidewalk below. And since they eat fish and only fish, their digestive systems are highly optimized to thoroughly digest the fish, and what comes out in the droppings is pure white, no seed shells, you know, no other colors. So unlike most of the other birds that roost in the trees and on Oahu, tern droppings are pure white. So pretty easy to detect when there's a chick in a tree above. And if you see a white tern sitting in a tree with a fish in its mouth, like this one in the lower right-hand corner, that's another strong clue that there's a chick someplace either in that tree or in the case of this adult, its chick is now fledged and flying, so it is waiting for the chick to come back so it can be fed. So these are all signs that we train the trimmers to watch for when working around trees to help them avoid disturbing nesting terns. See, Angela,
Right.
yeah.
Oh. Okay. So kind of know some tips on surveying trees. So we're gonna do like a little exercise. Can you guys find the adult tern in this photo? Yeah, so definitely surveying a tree is very hard, and you kind of want to section out the tree and start with big branches and then from the inner canopy and work your way out. Rich mentioned that they like to nest in forks of the tree and kind of like in unstable places. So those are areas you would like to look at. So yeah, here we have Lake, our arborist, who helps us. He volunteers and he puts birds back up in the tree. Usually surveys don't take that long. It's like 5 to 20 minutes, but if like the canopy is really thick, it's definitely going to take you longer. When the arborist gets up in the tree, they have better eyes. They can see better up on the top canopy and then the branches. And yeah, you just have to remember that the tree can have more than one nesting site. So if you find one nest and you're just like, okay, I think I'm done, there might be other nests in the tree. Yeah, so you can see where that red arrow is. That's where that white tern was nesting. Yeah, another places to get help is on that online website where we take actual photos of where the nesting site is. So that's a good resource to check if you have difficulties finding where the nest might be in a tree.
So, Rich, if you could go back one slide, we'll give it a try again. I'll stop the video actually. This is Angela again. Next slide, please. And so your you've surveyed for breeding activity. You've found some chicks or an incubating adult, and so you can continue to do your work as long as you're following the best practices that were established with the wildlife agencies, Manuoku experts, and working with arborists. And if Ryan, if my sound quality is bad, let me know again, okay? But one of the most important elements of working near breeding sites is to mind the buffer zone. And for Manuoku, the buffer zone is different from what is the traditional buffer zone that we think of, where we establish, you know, a distance of 50 or 100 feet for birds of prey, even more than that. For Manuoku, we call it the behavior-defined buffer zone. And that is defined by the behavior of the chick or the incubating adult. And so the tree worker or the arborist who's aloft and approaching the breeding site needs to then use their observation skills. So, of course, this is something that tree workers and arborists often already really are good at, is minding their environment and judging, making judgment calls and making decisions as they go along. So you're now paying attention to the behavior of the chick or the incubating adult, and looking for signs of stress and movement that indicate the Manuoku are being disturbed. When you observe that, then you need to stop work and move back. And all it takes is sometimes just a couple of minutes to wait for the turn, whether that's a chick or the incubating adult, to settle down before approaching again, attempting an approach. Next slide, please. And this is Lake again, and demonstrating an approach to a chick. And so there are also best practices for the tree worker or arborist who's aloft to use non-threatening behavior to minimize the stress of the chick or incubating adult. These may sometimes be obvious, but we'll spell them out. When you are approaching, your movements should be calm and unhurried. It definitely makes a difference because and incubating adults will be watching you very, very closely. Turn away your eyes and bodies. It reduces the sense of threat on the part of the white tern. Allow the give it time for the chick or adult to get used to your presence. Once they start feeling that you're not a threat to them, they will settle down, and then you can actually increase your level of activity around them. They will continue to observe you, of course, and also, but also perceive a lot less threat. And avoid sudden movements and loud noises as you approach. There should be a trained professional on the ground who continues to observe the incubating adult or chick for signs of stress. Sometimes a tree worker or the arborist aloft, when they're busy working, may take their attention off of the chick or the incubating adult, and that can develop into problems when there's disturbance and the tree worker is not watching. So if you have someone on the ground who's watching, for signs of stress, they can signal up to the lift or to the climber to stop or slow down. All right, next slide. So I don't know if this shows up in the slide, so I'll mention that incubating, oh, it does right here. The incubating adults are very sensitive, a lot more sensitive than normal adults who are not breeding. And they're also more sensitive than chicks quite often. So we encourage for tree workers to stay at 10 feet or more from an incubating adult. Keep in mind too, that if an incubating adult becomes nervous or stressed and begins to move off their egg, they could very easily bump the egg and knock it down. And then the egg, if it falls, of course, becomes a very big problem. So stay back from incubating adults, especially. I haven't observed that the chicks or incubating adults are necessarily disturbed by chainsaws, but it's still a good idea to use hand tools within 10 feet if you can. Electric saws have lower decibels, and we encourage for you to use electric saws within 20 feet. I talked earlier about buddying up and keeping a trained professional on the ground to help keep an eye on the terms in case the tree worker needs to then keep their attention on the pruning work.
Yeah, so pruning to improve the crown density, when the tree trimmers clean up the crown, it allows the adults to access their nest, but it also, you want to leave enough so that the chick and the birds are still protected.
Yeah, I want to jump in here just a second. This is a really, really important point here, pruning to improve crown density. So as I mentioned before, the terns don't actually build nests in the trees, yet we see them successfully nesting in trees. And I mentioned before that they often take advantage of the changes that occur in a tree's structure as a result of pruning in order to lay the eggs and to improve the chances of breeding success. We've discovered a very strong correlation between trees that are trimmed and successful breeding and trees that are not trimmed and the terns simply ignoring them when it comes to selecting breeding sites. Two trees, same species, side by side more or less. One trimmed, the other one not trimmed. I can say pretty much invariably the terns will use the trimmed tree. What we've observed is that trimming tends to improve the habitat, the breeding habitat for the terns. So it's a really, really neat relationship that we're seeing developing between the terns, the trees they breed in, and those who maintain the trees. As I mentioned before, also the terns are very, very popular in Honolulu, Waikiki. The general public is aware that the trees are an important reason why the terns are there. And our hope is that through what we've discovered, the relationship between the terns and the trees and the trimmers who maintain them, is that there will be a better appreciation for the very important work that the arborists perform in improving the breeding habitat so the terns continue to come back to Honolulu and Waikiki to breed. So that's a really important point. And to all you tree trimmers out there, if you ever wonder if what you do, if you have the general impression, which sometimes I'm afraid gets left, is that your tree trimming is bad for the birds. We know, at least in the case of the white terns, tree trimming is actually very good for the terns. It's important.
Great. I wanted to just jump in and say that it is 12 o'clock here on the Pacific Coast. So we have another half an hour. And so we're just going to continue with the presentation into the sort of question and answer period that we've planned. Any thoughts or questions about that before we keep going ahead? I know we have some important things to cover still. All right.
Are you still there, Angela? Do you want to give it another try?
Yeah, I can, and I'm also going to try and dial in at the same time, see if I can get a better voice connection here.
Okay.
Thanks, Carol, for that suggestion. Things to not do. Don't approach the breeding site from above, from the perspective of the Manuoku. That's a very threatening place from which a person can approach, and the buffer zone from that point is quite a bit more frightening for them. Do not vibrate, strike, or shake a branch with breeding activity that can shake off an incubating adult, or startle them, I should say, or also young fledglings who are not very good at flying yet can end up off the branch as a result. Young chicks tend to cling on pretty firmly, but even then they can get knocked off. Do not drop debris in or near the breeding site. And remember to keep in mind that if there's a breeze or drift, or the branch drifts, that it can then end up inside the breeding site, on top of the breeding site, or striking the branch with breeding activity. Do not remove branches or a tree with a flightless chick or egg without a permit, and we'll get into that more later. And remember that if you do harm or a chick or egg, do not keep the information to yourself. Do not hide it. But contact one of the organizations we will list later on. Next slide. Okay, so in case of emergencies, we have a couple of numbers right now with Rich out of state and unable to come to Hawaii. Your best bets are going to be the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and DLNR. And if you do have this kind of a situation where a chick or an egg has been harmed, contacting these right away will help you get somebody out there to give you a hand. All right, next slide. So please remember that just because it would be more convenient for you, for your company to have the chick or egg out of the way, doesn't mean that it's a real emergency. And a real emergency, next slide please, really needs to be determined by a qualified arborist, someone who has the TRAC qualification, tree risk assessment qualification, or is highly familiar with the tree risk assessment best practices, can help determine when there is a real emergency. And this means that the tree or the branch where the breeding activity is found is either actively failing or very likely to fail before the chick fledges, and the failure is has a target. It's anticipated to either cause injury or block a major thoroughfare, or damage a building or other structures, and the risk cannot be mitigated. In other words, the level of risk cannot be adequately reduced by partially removing a part of the crown, or barricading and blocking off the area, or moving whatever targets might be in the way. So we really, to define a situation as a real emergency, we need to fulfill all three of these criteria. Next slide, please. And remember too that when you are faced with an emergency, you should consider the following. Check the growth chart. How old is the chick, and is there the likelihood that it will be flying or fledged before before a failure might occur? So if your failure is expected to happen in the next 24 hours, of course, then you have a real emergency. But if there's a good chance the tree or branch will remain in place, especially with mitigation, for a month, for 2 months, then perhaps you can wait. And remember that if the crown can be reduced to lighten the load for either the branch in question or the whole tree, then perhaps the tree can remain stable enough so that the chick can stay in place until it fledges. When in doubt, contact the wildlife agencies or even Aloha Arborist, and we can look to have someone come out and meet with you so that we can help you with observations and to make the best decision possible. Document the situation as much as possible. If there is a real emergency, you'll want to be able to present that to the Fish and Wildlife Service or the DLNR, whichever the case may be. Next slide. Okay. And so we have encountered these real life situations before. This is a situation that came up in town in Honolulu where the tree service was called out. They were concerned that the tree was going to fail. I don't have the information specifically, but likely there was basal decay. That kind of circumstance comes up often. And they were really concerned that the tree was going to fail imminently. But they called out the Fish and Wildlife Service and then determined that the branch, that the tree was probably safe enough to keep as long as they significantly lightened up the load. So working with the Fish and Wildlife Service, they pruned everything else they removed everything else except for the branch where the chick is located. And then, so we can barely see the chick up there, but that made it possible to keep the tree until the chick fledged. And after which the tree was finally removed. So that was a real success story. Rich, jump in at any point if you have more you want to share about this.
Yeah, I guess this, as Angela said, this is a case where tree needed to be removed, but a chick was found in it, and they determined that, yeah, they could just remove some of the branches and leave the branch where the chick was, and address the danger. Yeah, in this case, they left it there. The chick hatched and fledged, and yeah, so yeah, so it's a good story from the perspective of the terns, but yeah, and it would have been simpler to just remove the tree. Everybody knows that. But also people in that particular condo complex, they know about the terns, they care about the terns. And when they see the care and attention that arborists take for watching out for the terns while they do work that needs to be done, that only improves the thinking and sense of goodwill that the people in town have for the arborist community. So it's good PR. I tell you, it's really bad PR when you cut a tree down, a tern is in it, and a tern is killed or injured. That's really bad public relations, and tree trimming companies don't want that. And we do our best to help make sure that it doesn't happen by supporting them and helping them to avoid those kinds of unpleasantries. Yeah, so this is I'm going to save this one until last, see if we have time. But this is just tells a story of a rescue effort that we mounted with the assistance of one of our arborists, your partners. But I'll just pass this one up for now. If we have time, circle back to it.
Okay, so there are beyond implementing the best practices while doing your routine tree care work is the best way that a tree service can help terns, but there are a number of other important roles that tree care professionals can play. They can help educate the public, the customers, and often you'll even have passersby who want to, throw questions at you. And so there's a great deal to be done to educate the public about these new best practices, and that it is possible to work near tern breeding sites without harming them, and direct them to the Aloha Arborist website. And Rich also printed up, Hui Manu Oku printed up these really nice glossy postcard size handouts that we can supply to tree services to help educate the public. Arboriculture professionals are often the first ones to come across a fallen or abandoned chick. And so if you do come across those, remember you can move them off the ground first of all, and also possibly even assist DLNR or Fish and Wildlife Service to return the fallen chick or rescue a fallen chick. More on that in a bit. We are always looking for climbers to help return chicks, work with Hui Manu Oku and the Fish and Wildlife, the wildlife agencies to return chicks to their breeding sites, and also, of course, to also help with banding when that occasionally happens. And if you are in the fortunate position of making recommendations for tree planting, look to plant trees with spreading crowns. As you know, the palms aren't used for breeding by Manu Oku, so if we can plant more kukui, monkey pods, and other these types of trees that they favor, it helps provide future breeding sites for them. Next slide. So you see here the front cover of the full guidelines. There's more information in the full guidelines that if you like this kind of thing for bedtime reading, I'm one of these who do pick up a trade publication for when I'm ready to relax. There also is there are just details on how to go look at the online map and put the apps onto your phone for looking for breeding sites while you're in the field. There is also the chick chart. So if you need that handy, that can be printed out from these tree care guidelines. And we don't have any field sessions right now, but if that's something that you're interested in, please give Aloha Arborist Association a call or email us, We can set these up and work with DLNR to do that, to do the field session. Next slide. And so we encourage you, if you have questions, to get in touch with either Aloha Arborist Association. Rich is available by phone or email. And then if you have any conditions you need help to check on in the field, DLNR and Fish and Wildlife Service are happy to come and support your work. So please get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, you three. That was great. I really learned a lot and really appreciate that. Let's do a little question and answer period here for at least a few minutes. I think the first question I saw that I wanted to ask you all was about training. So it sounds like the best way for people to get training is to contact the Aloha Arborist Association. How long does that training, what can you tell us about that training, and how long does it last? Do you need to get updated every few years, or how does that work?
This is Angela. So if the person has already just attended this webinar, they already have a lot of what we need them to know under their belt. And so we would just want to add the field session to work on using the app in the field, if that's something they're going to have on their phones, to talk about checking the Hui Manuoku website for existing data, and then to also inspect for breeding activity. And I would mention now, there's less breeding at this time of year than there would be in February through June, I'm going to say. But there is still some. And if you are doing the homework, look for tall trees as well as shorter stature trees for surveying, to see if you can really get good at the breeding, surveying for breeding sites. But we can work with you to do that part too, because then we can cover other topics related to these best practices that we didn't have time for during the presentation. But contact Aloha Arborist and we'll set it up.
Great. And what about ongoing with that? Is that going to be good forever? Is that good for just a year? How long does it last?
I don't think we've discussed that at this point. We expect, we don't have any updates or changes to the best practices. So it should be that any individual who's had the training is good to go. They are going to be pretty regularly encountering white terns if they were within the breeding range. And so that's something that they're going to actively be practicing, and that's really the best way to improve their skills.
Great.
With white terns.
Sorry, Rich, it sounded like I might have cut you off there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you wanted to go out and do the exercise, there are a couple of trees I can recommend where there's breeding activity recently reported. The first one is the banyan tree at the International Marketplace, downtown Waikiki. Just talking with a volunteer last evening, and she's reporting really a significant amount of breeding activity going on in that tree right now. So that's one place to check. Another place is over on downtown Honolulu, Richard Street, near the Capitol building, next to the War Memorial. Those low kukui trees have breeding throughout the year, but more so, there was one of those trees close to the sidewalk, actually had a chick hatched just a week ago. There should be a blue ribbon on that tree. Again, that's on Richard Street near the War Memorial. There's active breeding with a small chick, very, very visible from the sidewalk. So if that's where, if you'd like to do the homework assignment, those are two good places to go see active breeding right now.
Great, thanks for that. And feel free to turn on your video, Rich, and anyone else talking. I know Angela's is off because she's having connectivity issues. I'm interested in the sort of state law. Is it called HRA? HAR. How does that work, and what sort of details do we need to know about that? So what I was really struck by is, you know, in California, we have an Endangered Species Act that's very similar to the federal act. And I'm pretty sure that, for instance, once the chicks leave and fledge, that tree would be protected. We wouldn't be allowed to remove it. But it sounds like in Hawaii, that tree in that nesting site is not legally protected, but we're sort of encouraging people not to remove it, to maintain it whenever we can. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. We only would recommend removing a tree if it really has to. We like the trees being up, and how Rich was mentioning, like, we love that the tree trimmers are maintaining them, and the birds, really, the white terns, they love nesting in those trees. Yeah, so for like the HAR at laws, they basically yeah, they're just protected through disturbance and stuff. And so with those trees being up, people, the community, they recognize which trees they are, and so those are kind of like the protections that we get for those trees, is like the community knowing that white terns are nesting here, so they're just aware of that.
If I may add, that they do favor specific trees and the same branch, same location. The good thing is, I think we don't have the situation where trees are being removed or branches being pruned out on a wholesale level to where we're threatening the manuoku breeding activity. So occasionally the breeding sites might be removed for safety purposes, but it hasn't turned into an issue at this point, which is very, very helpful. I think if it could change if there was a major problem with that. So that's something for us to keep an eye on, definitely. Because there are many trees across their breeding range, maybe we're not as worried for the white terns. Their populations do continue to increase, and we do continue to have more and more breeding activity. So far, so good. But yeah, you're right, Ryan, that could change if we observed a major problem with that going forward.
We have a question about what has been done or is being done to reach out to the public to educate them about the white tern and the best management practices. We heard a little bit about a postcard that arborists can hand out. What else is being done?
We haven't had the chance to get articles into the local media, but that's something that we recently discussed and are planning to do. We had the chance for the first time last year in November to have a presentation at the Arbor Day events during at Foster Arboretum this last year, and that was a lot of fun. Rich, when he was here, had a tremendous amount of activities going on. And Rich, do you want to address that?
Sure. Yeah. So, like I say, we appreciate the important role that the arborist community plays in continuing to make the Hawaii, make the Honolulu Waikiki area such an appealing location for the terns to breed. So we take advantage of opportunities when we're out and about, seeing trimmers trimming the trees while we're surveying, to just sort of, thank them for what they do, make sure that they are aware of the BMPs, make sure that they're aware of the new findings, and they're not continue to work under the old sort of conventional but unfortunately wrong impressions about what you can and can't do when trimming around the turns. So it's an ongoing process to make sure they're aware, make sure they know that their work is appreciated. And in general, we find that they're happy to know that. One of the things that I think the general public needs to appreciate is people pick the arborist, the tree maintenance profession, not because they hate trees or because they hate the animals that use those trees, but probably because they, to some degree, love nature. And it's important that we make sure that they understand that we appreciate the work that they do, appreciate the keeping the trees in good health, both for our purposes, but also for the sake of the animals who rely on those trees. So, yeah, it's always look forward to the opportunities to interact with the tree trimmers and make sure they understand the important role that they play.
I really appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that. That's great insight.
Rich didn't mention it, but the Hui Manuoku and a coalition of wildlife organizations have the Manuoku Festival in the springtime, which is just a great, really fantastic event. A lot of fun, as well as that he was leading tours for the public. When we had visitors from Japan and other places to spend this sort of a different way to enjoy their visit to Hawaii. And then Rich, there were videos or documentaries being made too, right? So
yep.
Yeah,
the terms are getting more and more attention in the media, both on island and elsewhere. So it's a fantastic conservation story, I think. We often think that or assume that development inevitably is at the expense of wildlife. The story of the terns in Honolulu actually says that we can have both. We can have development, and we can have seabirds breeding in the trees in town if we just simply take the time to notice them, better understand their needs, and then do what we need to do in a way that takes their needs into account. They will continue to come back and to bless us with their presence. We just need to be aware.
So my first question was about this sort of Goldilocks tree density, right? Of removing too much, it's not ideal for the terns. Removing not removing any, it seems not ideal. Do we have any photo examples, any advice about how we can figure out what that ideal density is? What's the current thought on this?
So yeah, I'll start. You guys can maybe add more detail, but generally what we're looking for is enough of a canopy left above to provide shelter and protection for the breeding activity that's happening below, but to open up, remove twigs and branches under the canopy so that it's easier for the adults to fly in and to get to the nesting spot. But also from the perspective of a white-turned chick, just learning how to fly, the less cluttered it is under that canopy, the less likely I am to entangle my wings in a branch or a twig and then end up on the ground. Bad things happen to terns when they're on the ground. We never see a healthy tern on the ground. If it's on the ground, it's because something bad has happened. So yeah, a full canopy cover provides protection for them, but open under the canopy makes it easier for them to fly in and out of the tree. And as I mentioned before, when you trim a branch, trim a twig off a tree, scar tissue forms and creates a new nesting spot for them to use.
We talked about this when we were putting together the guidelines, and for the most part, if tree service is performing their routine maintenance for ornamental landscape trees, they're typically going to get the crown density reduced to a turn-friendly level. So there's not too much extra thinking we want or need them to do. We've seen some trees, a few instances where an extra piece of a block of lumber was added to the side of a branch in order to help hopefully keep the egg from rolling off. That's not necessary, of course, but we've seen that even. In terms of what the adults seem to prefer is some canopy cover. In the guidelines, we discuss a 70% canopy cover over the breeding site, but we have also seen breeding adults in much more exposed locations. They don't seem to be harmed by it necessarily, but about a 70% canopy cover over the breeding site is what we discussed and is showing in the guidelines too. So if that's of help.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed that 70%. I see that now. I'll read that paragraph again. And then we have a couple of biology questions here of what do we know about the population trends? Are they increasing? Are they decreasing? I think both in Honolulu and internationally across their range. And what's the best time to band fledglings? And are there white tern banding programs right now?
Yeah, the population of breeding terns on Oahu continues to increase. They're doing quite well. They're thriving. The breeding population is estimated to be a couple thousand, and we've seen that number increase from each year that we've been watching. They are some birds or species are classified in the ornithological community by how well they're doing as a species, from endangered, threatened to species of least concern, which is to say they're thriving, they're doing quite well. The terns are in the latter category, fortunately. They're thriving, they're doing well. In terms of banding, yeah, we ban them when we ban them as chicks, but we wait until they're almost ready to fly. We try to ban them before they think they're able to fly. So what we don't want them to do is to try to fly to get away from us when we climb the tree to we catch them with our hands. You put the band on them and then you place them back. So it's a pretty small window of opportunity, about a week or two that we have when they're old enough, the legs are large enough to put the band on, but they're not old enough that they're going to try to fly to get away from us and potentially hurt themselves.
And that happens year round, or do you focus it on that peak breeding season?
Well, no, when we band a chick, it's because a couple criteria we have. One is it the nesting spot in an area where it's likely to be seen again in the future? If it's someplace in remote area of the breeding range where nobody's likely to be able to see it, it's less useful to expend the resources and time to catch it and band it. Is it the nesting spot accessible both visually and physically? The bands are quite small. And so bands serve a number of purposes. They're usually bands are seen when a bird is found dead on the ground. We band them hoping to see them again while the bird is living. In the case of terns, if they die, they're likely going to die at sea, and we're never going to find them anyway. A dead tern we don't find very often on Oahu. So bands for us is we're most interested in being able to see them on a living bird, so it can tell us things like how far has it moved from where it hatched, how old is it, and what stage of life is it at as when we observe it again. Yeah, so we ban them as chicks, and in areas where we think we're likely to see them again if they come back to that area.
Great. Well, I think that's probably about the time we have today. So I learned so much. I really appreciate you three joining us today. Any parting words before we leave?
Well, I would
Read
simply,
guidelines.
I'm sorry, I would simply foot stomp. If you're a tree trimmer, we in Hawaii, we really appreciate what you do for the terns, and we know other species of birds benefit as well from what you do. But we work with the terns, and as I tell people who love the terns, if you love the terns, you gotta love the tree trimmers as well. So thanks much for what you do.
Well said.
Thank you, everyone.
Aloha.
All right. Aloha. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.